Princess Anastasia's disappearance stunned the world. 90 years later, experts finally have an answer. But before we start, please make sure to subscribe to m&rtv and hit the bell so you never miss any upload from us. Also, leave a like right now. The murders of the Romanov family sent shockwaves through the world. From the brutality of the Russian royals' executions to the opportunists who attached themselves to the controversy, everything seemed too shocking to be true. That's why, over a century after her disappearance, mention of Anastasia Romanov still raises suspicion. The mystery eclipsed the real-life tragedy of a clever, rascally girl who had a lot more to her story than any movie or conspiracy theory could illustrate. Upon learning that he and Empress Alexandra were expecting a fourth baby girl, Tsar Nicholas was not overcome with joy. He had to take a walk to collect himself because they desperately needed a male heir. Soon, he quickly recovered and embraced the role of a caring father. Of all the Romanov children, Anastasia certainly wasn't the most fragile. While she was known for her effervescence, she still had a few minor health problems. She dealt with bunions, issues with her back muscles, and the common royal genetic disorder, hemophilia. As her older siblings probably would have attested, Anastasia was a bit of a pest. The little stinker was known to kick and scratch other kids and was always trying to pull one over on the waitstaff. She was certainly a kid with spunk. In fact, Anastasia was given a pretty crude nickname to match her penchant for obnoxious behavior, Imp. Don't worry, she could handle it. Anastasia was a tough cookie who was able to make you laugh as she misbehaved. Natural-born rebel, Anastasia hated doing schoolwork. She was not one to sit still and follow orders for more than a few minutes. On more than one occasion, she opted to climb trees to avoid going back to class. Other times, she relied on strategy. To get out of schoolwork, Anastasia came up with a plan. She decided to appeal to her teachers with bribes. To butter up her English teacher, she presented a bouquet of flowers. When her teacher refused them, Anastasia switched tactics and gave them to her Russian instructor. Out of all her siblings, Anastasia was closest to her eldest sister Olga. Surviving letters document their bond, detailing their shared interests in physical activity. Diaries specifically mention their adventures as a duo, cycling, skiing, and boating. Royal life had its merits, but it was important for Empress Alexandra that her children didn't get spoiled. Oddly enough, she deprived her daughters of normal comforts, forcing them to take cold baths and sleep on beds of iron, as her mother had once made her. Besides their less than comfortable sleeping arrangements, the Romanov daughters had regular chores and household responsibilities. The Empress made sure they knew how to sew, so the little leisure time they were allowed was spent making doll clothes. Every member of the Romanov family had their own pet. In Anastasia's case, she had Jimmy, a Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, who went with her everywhere, including to the execution. It's believed that she held him during their final moments. Over the course of July 16th and 17th, 1918, the Romanov family met a grisly end. The Tsar of Russia, Nicholas II, his wife, Empress Alexandra, their daughters Olga, Tatiana, Maria, Anastasia, and son Alexei, and their family pets were all ushered into the basement. In what could have been a last-ditch effort to save their lives, Empress Alexandra instructed her daughters to secretly sew jewels into their clothes to perhaps deflect the bullets. When the executioners came calling, the Romanov children were dressed in their finest things. 2 rounds of gunfire and bayonets were used against the Romanovs, and their remains were later recovered in Yekaterinburg, Russia. Technological limitations halted the identification of all the family members for decades, which is why theories of Anastasia's fate went haywire. How anyone could take the Romanov family executions and turn them into animated magic is difficult to understand. Yet the animated film was a success. Of course, the children's film swapped out many details about the missing Duchess, though there were some historical accuracies. That yellow dress depicted in the animated Anastasia film was based on the real deal. Records show that the real Romanov was photographed in a gown of a similar sunny shade in the days leading up to her death. As one of the most high-profile missing persons of the early 20th century, there were a lot of people who claimed to be the one and true Anastasia. Out of all those who tried to convince the public, the most successful was Anna Anderson. The remaining relatives of the Romanovs absolutely refuted Anna Anderson's claims. Grandmother Dowager Empress Maria simply refused to give her the attention and wouldn't meet her, though an aunt Olga did grant her a visit and left with the words, "I was looking at a stranger." Tracking down the last missing Romanov dragged on for nearly a century. In the wake of the tragedy, over 100 people came forward alleging to be Anastasia. Relatives and former staff were called forward as witnesses to weed out the fakers. From the time Anna Anderson first came forward asserting that she was the long-lost Romanov daughter in 1928, all the way up until 1994, there was no way to validate her claim. After years of lawsuits, and Anderson's eventual death, DNA proved she wasn't a match. Speculation, rumors, and the capitalization of her disappearance, the unknown fate of Anastasia Romanov was not treated as the tragedy it was. Thankfully, closure came in 2007 when DNA testing of the mass gravesite identified Anastasia along with her brother Alexei. Unreleased photographic evidence told the rest of their story. The Romanov family tragedy remains one of the most horrific brutalities in recent world history. For Tsar Nicholas II, Tsarina Alexandra, and their 5 children, life shifted from the trappings of royalty to the confinement of prisoners. Nicholas II was the final emperor of Russia. His mishandling of World War I and the dire consequences his nation faced as a result led to his forced abdication of the crown. This portrait was taken moments later, before he understood the horrors that awaited his family. Before the bleakness, life was good for the Romanovs. Nicholas and Alexandra welcomed 4 daughters. The 2 eldest, Olga and Tatiana, were dubbed the Big Pair. The 2 youngest, Maria and Anastasia, were logically called the Little Pair. At the time, the most discussed was Tatiana. She inherited her mother's good looks, with steely blue-gray eyes and auburn hair. Apart from the attention she attracted from her beauty, Tatiana was respected for her wartime efforts, serving as a nurse with the Red Cross. The arrival of Alexei, their only son, gave the Romanovs a collective sigh of relief. He was the male heir that they'd so desperately needed, though they soon discovered the boy was plagued with health problems, suffered from the rare blood clotting disorder hemophilia. Politics and illness aside, the Romanovs lived like most other kids, playing with their cousins, running around outside, older sisters simultaneously bossing around and doting on their brother. Their parents whisked them around the country to various royal estates, as contemporary royals do. Nicholas II was the picture-happy dad behind the camera. As an amateur photographer, his favorite subject was his family. 6 full albums packed with candids were recovered years later, containing gems like this beach day outing. Everyone was hyper-protective of Alexei given his illness and succession to the throne. A hovering mother and sisters couldn't keep Alexei from goofing off like a normal little boy. Flopping around in the sand or riding a sled down a staircase, he could have given a hoot about safety. "Took the elephant to our pond with Alexei today and had fun watching him bathe," wrote the Tsar in a 1914 journal entry. The Romanovs owned an entire zoo full of exotic creatures until the war and subsequent Russian Revolution in 1917 resulted in its closure. Their favorite retreat was aboard their yacht, the Standard. This ship was a picture of lavishness, chandeliers glittering from the rocking waves, top-notch interiors flanked in mahogany. It made a fitting location to soften the blow when Nicholas II learned of the assassination of Archduke Ferdinand. While Nicholas II attempted to entangle the strategies of war, his children balanced time at home with their mother versus their own wartime responsibilities. Olga, in her nurse's veil, volunteered to assist wounded soldiers. Anastasia was too young for nursing, so she and Maria played checkers with the injured. As monarchs, wartime relief was encompassing family affair. Everyone pulled their weight, visiting soldiers to boost morale, together presented a united front. However, Tsarina Alexandra's ties to Germany, she was a German-born princess, didn't bode well with the rest of the country. In spite of the tension, the Romanovs stuck to their duties. Tsar Nicholas was joined by Maria and Anastasia at the bedside of wounded soldiers. Less than a year later, the family would be held captive at the hands of their own soldiers. In the days before the shoe dropped for the royals, the girls dealt with a case of the measles. Alexandra lined her daughters up and shaved each of their heads, yet they smiled through it, not knowing their entire family was about to be placed under house arrest. Revolution erupted, and Nicholas II was forced to relinquish his and Alexei's claim to the monarch. The guards who once protected the Romanovs turned cruel and vindictive. This picture was taken during their captivity, with Anastasia holding Tatiana's pet bulldog, or Tipo, a gift from a smitten soldier. Tatiana wrote to a fellow nurse friend in 1917, expressing her frustrations with sitting idle in captivity. It is strange to sit in the morning at home, to be in good health, and not go to change the bandages. Royal functions and etiquette fell by the wayside. Tatiana rose to action in the midst of the crisis, keeping a level head. For a period, the family was separated, the parents and son at one location, the daughters at another. They avoided prison cells, though their house arrest conditions were far from cushy. Alexei, weakened from his inherited hemophilia, was still expected to execute hard labor. All their food was restricted to soldier rations. One saving grace was the Romanovs were allowed to keep their dogs for company. Of the 3 family pets, Joy, Alexei's dog, was the only one that appealed to the sympathies of the guards on the day of their final tragedy. The last year of their lives was an isolated waiting game. Moved roughly from location to location, exile weighed on their spirits. Nicholas acted as the glue for his family, maintaining an internal calm during crisis, taking pictures like this in their final months together. End of the road for the Romanovs was the Yekaterinburg's Ipatiev house. Soldiers woke the family and ushered them to the basement, supposedly to shield them from a nearby riot. Instead, the family was executed by gunfire, and when that didn't work, by bayonets. Murmurs that 1 or 2 of the daughters survived the execution swirled for decades. Anastasia was primarily the focus. DNA testing debunked that theory years later, and the entire Romanov family was buried in a mass grave located in 1991. It took until 1998 for the family to be properly laid to rest. A funeral attended by the Russian Prime Minister at the time, Boris Yeltsin, acted as a symbolic acknowledgement of wrongdoings by the government. Misinformation about the Romanov case leaked for decades. People gathered false facts from fictional accounts in movies. The delay in determining DNA identification inspired hundreds of people to claim they were the elusive, long-lost Romanov. In actuality, all the victims were long since murdered.